The call to quorum.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to take this occasion to acknowledge a very important event that occurred last night. It occurred in the other body where we had a vote for the first time since we have been deliberating and debating and wrestling with this challenge of what to do with our debt limit and the fact that we have reached that debt limit. We have had a vote by one of the two bodies that has a say in this matter on this very issue. And the House voted yesterday by a significant margin with a bipartisan vote, although it was mostly one-sided. There were members of both parties that voted in favor of raising the debt limit. The House voted to raise the debt limit, in fact, by the full amount that the President requested. The House voted to raise the debt limit by $2.4 trillion, which would completely eliminate this problem, this struggle that we have had over this looming deadline that we've been given. Now, the House vote to do so came with one condition. Came with the condition that the President join Congress in putting our federal government on a path to a balanced budget. That's the requirement. That's the contingency. And the way the House bill achieves that is by establishing three parts. The first are cuts in spending. The second part are caps on spending. And the third is a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. And the colloquial name that this approach has been given is the cut, cap, and balance approach. This is a big deal because until last night, among the three parties to this debate, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the President, nobody had previously laid out a case that says, here's how we will raise this debt limit and deal with this problem. The House has now done so. They have passed this measure by a significant margin. And I want to just quickly walk through the three elements of it, the cuts, the caps, and the balance. And they're really all different pieces designed to achieve one goal, which is to put our federal budget on a path to balance. The cut refers to cuts in spending in this next fiscal year, which begins soon. It begins on October 1st. The cut is 3% from this year's spending level, 3%. So under the House-passed plan, next year we would spend 97% of everything that we're spending this year, but we'd cut 3%. Now, anybody who has run a business, anybody who's run a household knows that if you have to, you can cut 3% from any big budget. I guarantee you, from the enormously bloated and oversized $3.7 trillion of the U.S. government's budget, 3% is not much. But that's the cut. That's the first part. That's the level of spending for next year. It's about 3%, $111 billion. The next part are caps. And these are statutory limits to how much the federal government would be permitted to spend in each of the subsequent years for the next 10 years. Now, these levels have spending grow every year. Some suggest that these are draconian, savage cuts in spending. Actually, it's increases. But it's increases in spending at a slower rate than what we've had in the past, and slower, certainly, than what others have proposed, what the President's budget proposed, and what the Congressional Budget Office is expecting. And therein lies savings. Therein lies the opportunity to put us on a path to a balanced budget, because I think we all acknowledge that, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to achieve a balanced budget overnight. Can't do it. We've dug too deep a hole. So we need a little bit of time to get there. The spending caps provide that discipline as we move in that direction. And the final piece is a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, which is something that most Americans have strongly supported for a long time. And if we achieve that, then, frankly, we'd never have to worry about raising the debt limit anymore, because we wouldn't run a deficit. We'd be forbidden. And without a deficit, you don't need to issue new debt, so the debt would never rise. And this problem would be permanently resolved. But much more importantly, we would have our federal government on a sustainable, strong, viable fiscal path, and that would create the opportunity for strong economic growth. See, I'm convinced that part of the reason we're having such a weak economy and such poor job growth is because the uncertainty that we've created not so much over whether we're going to raise the debt limit on August 2nd or 3rd or 1st or whenever. It's are we going to solve the big fiscal challenge that we face, the problems that are dragging down Europe now, and the problems that loom for us. Now, the President and the Treasury Secretary have been extremely alarmed about the prospect that we might not raise the debt limit on August 2nd. To that very point, the Treasury Secretary said, and I quote from a May 13th letter that he sent to members of Congress, he said, "This would be an unprecedented event in American history," by which he's referring to a failure to raise the debt limit. "A default would inflict catastrophic, far-reaching damage on our nation's economy, significantly reducing growth and increasing unemployment." President Obama had a similar message of great alarm, saying, again, referring to a scenario in which we did not raise the debt limit by August 2nd, he said, "If investors around the world thought that the full faith and credit of the United States were not being backed up, if they thought that we might renege on our IOUs, it could unravel the entire financial system. We could have a worse recession than we already had, a worse financial crisis than we already had." So this is how serious the President and the Treasury Secretary say is their concern that we raise the debt limit. Well, the House just did it. The House has said, Mr. President, we hereby vote, and they did vote, to raise the debt limit by $2.4 trillion, the full amount that the President asked for, and they've said the only condition is that you, Mr. President, need to join us in putting our budget on a path to balance, taking care of this fiscal crisis and giving us a sustainable fiscal footing so that we can have strong economic growth. And so the question today before us is, will the President join us? You know, will the President embrace this? The President, as I've just quoted, has indicated great alarm at the prospect of not getting the debt limit increase that he's asked for. The House has just said, here it is. And actually, I think, if not every Republican senator, a big majority of Republican senators will support what the House has done, and I hope that there will be many Democrats who will support this as well. Because none of us wants to test the proposition of what happens if we don't raise that debt limit. And so the opportunity is here now. For the first time, we have a bill has been passed in one of these two bodies that would do exactly what the President has asked for, with just this one condition. And let me comment for a moment on one of the reasons why I think it's so important that the President join us in putting our budget on a path to a balance. We have heard from various rating agencies that several of them are considering downgrading the credit standing of the United States. This is an appalling thought to me. I was involved in the bond market in my first career when I got out of college, and the United States stood above ratings. We didn't talk about having a AAA rating because we were above even that. Our rating was so superior to anyone else that it didn't even, the rating system didn't even really apply to the United States. Well, now, not only does it apply, but the danger is that we won't even qualify for the top rating. And do you know what it is that would cause them to downgrade the debt of the United States? It's not a failure to raise the debt limit by August 2nd. It's the failure to address this fiscal imbalance, these massive, unsustainable deficits. That's what they have told us has to be corrected, or else the downgrade follows, and a downgrade will be enormously problematic because it has all kinds of knock-on effects. So we've heard about a lot of different ideas that have been floated, and I want to congratulate and commend everybody who's been involved in putting in a lot of effort. I don't agree with everything that everybody has talked about doing, but I think we've seen people in both parties make a good faith effort to try to solve this problem one way or another. But the fact is there's only one proposal on the table that has passed either body, and there is only one proposal that actually solves our long-term fiscal challenge in the law that's already been passed, in the bill that's already been passed. And so my question is now, will the President join us and put our government on a path to a balanced budget? We don't expect to get there overnight. And by the way, the various levels of cuts and spendings and the exact terms of the balanced budget amendment naturally would be subject to discussion. But will the President join us in this effort to restore fiscal sanity and give us the basis for a strong economic growth? That's the question, and that's the opportunity for the President. Now, I know the President has been dismissive of the idea of balancing our budget, but I certainly hope that he is not so opposed to balancing our budget that he would reject the debt limit increase that he has said we desperately need. There's an opportunity here to solve two problems at once. To solve this problem over the looming date of August 2nd, by which he has said we absolutely must raise the debt limit. But the more important opportunity is to put our House in fiscal order. The House took a very, very important step in that direction. The Senate will have a vote later this week. I hope my colleagues in the Senate will embrace this opportunity, and the President will join us, and will put our federal government on a path to balance. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Morning business is closed.
Madam President.
The Senator from Oregon.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to have 5 minutes to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to address Senator Wyden's amendment number 570 regarding the closure of the Umatilla Chemical Depot. It is an amendment I am proud to partner with him in. This is a very important issue to my home state of Oregon. We have a situation where at this depot, 20 years of planning have gone forward to arrange for the final transition of this chemical depot based on the Base Realignment and Closing Commission's recommendations. Indeed, the BRAC Commission, as it is known, noted that, quote, on completion of the chemical demilitarization mission in accordance with treaty obligations, close the Umatilla Chemical Depot in Oregon, unquote. And this was language that was specifically done to recognize that the chemical depot had to complete its work dismantling the chemical weapons stored there according to the Chemical Weapons Convention Treaty, and that treaty had a deadline of April 29, 2012. And thus, it wasn't clear that the work would be done within the 6 years outlined for most of the BRAC's work. And so they changed the language from close the Umatilla Chemical Depot to on completion of the chemical demilitarized mission in accordance with treaty obligations. So, since this has been a discussion for so long, with the community working so hard, with so many stakeholders in order to put the plans together to transition this base to a productive civilian role, it came as a complete shock recently when the community was notified by the Army that despite the specific language that accommodated the treaty deadline of April 2012, they were going to rule that the transfer under the BRAC legislation could not be completed because it was an exception, even an exception written into law, to the initial 6 years. Well, this is quite a shock, because a local reuse authority has been formed and has been working hard with representatives from all local stakeholders to make sure that this base is transferred in a way that creates the best possible economy and best use of this land. It's been a complicated task. It's been an earnest effort. This is not the time for the Army to change the rules. Digging up a clause and misapplying that clause, ignoring the exception written into the law, and claiming that this work done over all of this time doesn't matter. So that is why I'm so delighted to join with Senator Wyden in putting a clarification into statute that says, yes, what the original legislation said, with an April 2012 deadline, recognizing our treaty obligations, must be honored, and the BRAC process must be honored for the best use of this land in the community. Thank you, Madam President.
The senator from South Dakota.
I ask unanimous consent to return to morning business.
Without objection.
President, I quote former Reagan economic advisor Bartlett on House Republican plan. Distributionally, the Rand plan is a monstrosity. The rich would receive huge tax cuts while the Social Security safety net would be shredded to pay for them. Even as an opening bid to begin budget negotiations with the Democrats, the Rand plan cannot be taken seriously. It is less of a wish list than a fairy tale, utterly disconnected from the real world, backed up by make-believe numbers and unreasonable assumptions. Rand's plan isn't even an act of courage. It's just a pandering to the Tea Party. A real act of courage would have been for him to admit, as all serious budget analysts know, that revenues will have to rise well above 19% of GDP to stabilize the debt. Former Reagan administration economic advisor Bruce Bartlett from Capital Gains and Games blog and Balanced Budget. And I would want to clarify the impacts of the balanced budget proposal. He has called it sheer idiocy. That comes from a Reagan economic advisor. I yield back. And note to yeah.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment and to call up my amendment 575, which is at the desk.
The senator from New Hampshire. Is there objection? Without objection, the clerk will report.
The senator from New Hampshire, Ms. Ayotte, proposes an amendment numbered 575.
Reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I have filed an amendment to H.R. 2055 that seeks the help to make sure that our wounded warriors get the benefits of next-generation advanced prosthetics in a timely fashion. This amendment would require the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to submit to Congress a report within 90 days identifying the bureaucratic hurdles and red tape that we need to cut through to make sure that the research that is being done and the next generation advanced prosthetics that are being developed to help our wounded warriors will get to them as quickly as possible. We have invested substantial taxpayer dollars, including through the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, in developing this great technology in advanced next-generation prosthetics. Last week I had the chance to go to Walter Reed Hospital and meet with some of our wounded warriors. They are absolutely amazing Americans, and what they have done for our country is incredible. We can never repay the sacrifices that they have made, but the last thing that they should have to put up with is waiting for years of delay through the FDA or other government agencies to make sure that they can get the very best technology available for next-generation advanced prosthetics. And that is why I offer this amendment, and I hope that this amendment will be passed to make sure that we can cut through the red tape, that the Veterans Administration will identify any hurdles that are present, that we can get through those hurdles and get that technology to our wounded warriors as soon as possible, given what they have done for our country and continue to do in fighting on our behalf. They are heroes, and they deserve to not have to wait and wade through government bureaucracy. Thank you, Madam President. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Madam President, will the senator withhold your suggestion?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Madam President.
The senator from California.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendments and call up amendment number 577.
Is there objection? Without objection, the clerk will report.
Senator from California, Mrs. Boxer, proposes an amendment numbered 577.
I ask that the amendment be considered as read, and I just have about 1 minute to talk on it
Without
right
objection.
now. Madam President, the Department of Defense runs schools that serve over 86,000 children across America, Europe, and the Pacific region. That's why I was able to get together with Senator Graham and Senator Inhofe to work on a way that we could get those schools fixed, because they're crumbling. And since the picture is worth 1,000 words, I'll just show this picture from one of the schools. You can see the tiles on the roof just crumbling. We've had that in our public schools before we woke up. Literally, these tiles fall down, and it's just by the grace of God that a child doesn't get hit or a teacher doesn't get hit and very hurt. So clearly, we need to do something about it. What I'd like to say is that we started off with an amendment that actually require the DOD to fix up these schools. Now we're asking for a report that they do it, because we have to avoid some parliamentary procedure problems of legislating on appropriations. So we believe we've done this. I think everyone should read last month's Newsweek. They published an investigation by the Center for Public Integrity which documented the conditions of DOD-run schools with serious problems, leaks and corrosion and mold and overcrowding and relying on temporary facilities. And my amendment had the strong support of the National Military Families Association. They sent me a statement. I'll close with this. DOD schools, especially at U.S. installations overseas, are a community focal point and a key element in the support network for our military families stressed by a decade of war. Poorly repaired or out-of-date buildings can also create the perception among military families that their children's education is not a priority for our nation. So I urge support for this bipartisan amendment, and I would yield the floor.
Madam President,
The majority leader.
I ask unanimous consent that the Johnson-Kirk Amendment number 556 be modified further with the changes that are at the desk, that Senator Warner be added as co-sponsor of the Johnson-Kirk Amendment, that the pending amendments be set aside, and 2 amendments from Senator Hutchinson be called up, number 562 and 563 on block, and following the reporting of the Hutchinson amendments, the following pending amendments be agreed to. Johnson-Kirk 556 is further modified, Wyden 570, Hutchinson 562, Hutchinson 563. Further, the pending McCain amendment number 553 be withdrawn, that no other amendments, motions, or points of order be in order other than the motions table or budget points of order, and the applicable motions are waived, and that at 4:45 p.m. today, the Senate proceed to a vote in relation to the following amendments in the order listed below. Ayotte 575, Boxer 577, Coburn 564. That upon disposition of the Coburn amendment, the substitute amendment as amended be agreed to. The bill be read a third time, and the Senate proceed to a vote on passage of the bill as amended, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table. Finally, that upon passage, the Senate insists on its amendment request a conference of the House on the disagreeing votes of 2 houses, and the chair be authorized to appoint conferees on the part of the Senate with a ratio of 9 to 8.
Is there objection?
There'd be 2 minutes between each vote.
Madam President, I would ask that this be modified to allow 2 minutes of debate between each vote.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will report the Hutchinson amendments.
The senator from Texas, Mrs. Hutchison, proposes amendments numbered 562 and 563.
Amendments 556 as modified, 570, 562, and 563 are agreed to. Amendment 553 is withdrawn. The senator from Arizona.
Madam President, I rise in support of the Coburn Amendment and ask unanimous consent to engage in a colloquy with the senator from Oklahoma.
Without objection.
Madam President, I think it's important for us to understand what this amendment is about. It does not affect the decisions regarding disability as a result of Agent Orange that have already been decided under the guidelines that were extended by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. This is a prospective amendment, so any allegation that this is somehow affects previous awarding of disability payments is not correct. It's a prospective amendment for cases that will be decided in the future. The issue of disability is always one that is very difficult because we start on the basis that it concerns men and women who have served honorably in the military. So obviously the predilection is appropriately to grant disabilities where those claims are made. But we now have a situation where somewhere around $40 billion, $31 billion simply over the issue of heart disease can be awarded without what appears to be a direct connection to Agent Orange. Now, there were many of our men and women who were serving in the conflict in Vietnam who were exposed to Agent Orange, but there were many, many more who were not. And I don't think you can make a case that someone who was stationed on a ship in the Gulf of Tonkin somehow has a connection and many miles from any Agent Orange, that you could make a plausible case that Agent Orange was the cause of this disability. So what this amendment tries to do is give a realistic set of parameters for the awarding of disability or payment of disability for those who actually were exposed, and not only exposed, but also that there is a direct connection between the exposures to herbicides and the outcome. So there are many needs amongst our veterans, and they are there every single day. And the purpose of this amendment is to make sure that there is a legitimate need for compensation for those who were exposed to Agent Orange and a direct connection between that exposure and certain disabilities, particularly heart disease, Parkinson's disease, Hodgkin's, etc. So what we're trying to do here is make sure that those who are actually exposed and there is a direct connection are rewarded, and adequately so, but at the same time not have a situation where it is an open-ended expenditure of taxpayers' dollars. So the Veterans Disability Benefits Commission endorsed the need for establishing a new framework for presumptions with more transparent processes, but it failed to take the full step of embracing causality in decision-making. This amendment will achieve that goal identified by the Institute of Medicine to ensure that scientifically based causality is at the heart of the disability determination process. I would match the Senator from Oklahoma's in my commitment to our veterans with anyone in this body, but there also has to be some rationality associated with it. I was a great admirer of the Honorable Tony Principi, who was the former Secretary of Veterans Affairs. And again, I want to quote from his statement, "If the American people lose faith in the integrity of our disability benefit systems, veterans and their families will be the ones who suffer. The surest way for that to happen is for the public to be convinced that presumptive service connection decisions are based on anything other than sound scientific advice. These presumptions, as they presently exist, are not based on sound scientific advice." So with some, I'm sure that this amendment is not popular, but I want to thank my colleague from Oklahoma for bringing it to the attention of this body.
I thank the senator from Arizona and would note we want to make sure that any veteran that has a positive causation factor from any aspect that would lead to any disability, that we meet that need. That's not what this is about. This has been looked at 2 times by the Institute of Medicine. The first time, there was no study. None of the studies that they cited showed even positive association. The last time they had 2 that showed some positive association, but absolutely no causation. No causation. There's a big difference in science. Something can be associated with something, doesn't mean it causes it. And on the basis of that, the Secretary committed this country to make payments to people for disabilities that are not associated with their service. So the point is, in a limited budget going forward, if we're paying for disabilities that aren't associated with service, that means we're going to have less money available to those veterans who do have a disability for their service. And we've heard, number one, that this will reverse all that have been made forward. It will not. It's prospective only. It will not change the presumption that if you were in or above Vietnam, you have the presumption of being exposed to Agent Orange. That won't be changed at all. The previous scientific diseases that are based on causation won't be eliminated at all. But in fact, those that aren't associated with causality will be eliminated. Now, will they be eliminated in the future? If the science at some point in time shows us that there is a causal relationship between that exposure and disease, then we can do something about it. But now we're throwing money at disabilities that are not associated and not caused by veterans' exposure to this herbicide. So I would ask, given where we are in this country, and the fact that we're going to have a tough time funding veterans programs in the future anyway, that we ought not spend $1 on something that is not directly caused by a veteran's exposure to Agent Orange, so that we have that $1 to pay for those that truly were exposed and truly do have a disability. I yield back to the senator from Arizona.
Well, I thank the senator from Oklahoma, and I would just ask him, I've heard anecdotally that the eligibility for disability under the guidelines as issued by the Secretary of the Army. And by the way, when we're talking about $40-some billion of additional taxpayers' money, I think that that should be the subject of legislative action rather than a decision made by the Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Is it not true that anecdotally we've heard that people who were in the Korean War and not the Vietnam War have somehow become eligible, and people who were on ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, not anywhere near Agent Orange, have also been declared eligible?
They are eligible, and there are some reasons for that, but that's not what this debate is about. You know, we're not questioning it. We're just saying on this basis, we're not using science how we've used it in every other aspect of veterans' disability. Now we're going beyond science, and when you look at the total number of studies, Rarely 3% even show any association. And association doesn't imply any causation. So what we have is the Secretary has made a decision to commit this country to $42 billion of additional expenditures, not based on sound science, but the fact that he can do that. And that is what I think is wrong. If the committee, the Veterans Committee, thinks that there is the science to do that, they should bring a bill to the floor and do that. But the science is not there. I've looked at it. I've read it. It's not there. The Institute of Medicine says it's not there. And they say disability ought to be based on causation, not on association.
Madam President, we yield the floor.
President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Boxer Amendment number 5... And first I ask the quorum call be dispensed with. I apologize.
Without objection.
And now I ask unanimous consent that the Boxer Amendment number 577 be modified with the changes that are already at the desk.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
unanimous consent that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection. Under the previous order, the question on the Amendment 575. All those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Under the previous order, the question is on the Boxer Amendment number 577, as modified. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. There will now be 2 minutes of debate equally divided on the Coburn Amendment.
Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
This is a common sense amendment that will secure disability payments for our veterans and make sure we are not paying for disabilities for those that are not truly service-connected, that are not based on science or causation. I know it's a tough vote, but in the environment that we face today, we ought to be using science to positively connect causality with any disability that we grant. And with that, I would retain the balance of my time.
President.
The Senator from Washington.
Madam President, just so my colleagues know, there is a reason that we have made this type of compensation like Agent Orange presumptive. It's because our military did a miserable job of tracking these exposures, and it's because no veteran will ever be able to go to a map and tell you with certainty where they were exposed. No veteran's going to be able to tell you when or how much of this poison of Agent Orange they inhaled. So we have to look at the facts with reason and compassion. And in this case, on the one hand, we have the knowledge that we sprayed a known killer throughout the area where these Vietnam veterans were serving. We have thousands of veterans who've come forward and believe that their cancers and their ailments were caused by that exposure. We have studies that show veterans exposed to Agent Orange are more likely to have heart disease, cancer, and other conditions. We have the Institute of Medicine, which has recommended giving these veterans the benefit of the doubt. And we have the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs, who decided that we need to move forward to provide compensation. On the other hand, we have an amendment today that, while it makes a compelling case for saving money, it hasn't presented any evidence at all that Agent Orange did not cause the conditions faced by these Vietnam veterans. An amendment that just asks our veterans to wait longer, something they have already done too much of. They've been waiting, they've been getting sicker, they've been dying for 40 years or more. We shouldn't ask them to wait longer.
Time has expired.
Thank you, Madam President. I urge my colleagues to vote to table this amendment. And, Madam President, if the Senator wants to finish his remarks, I will move to table when he's finished.
Madam President, I'd make one point. The Institute of Medicine did not recommend this. Matter of fact, their recommendation that causality ought to be the only thing in which we do this. I would ask the yeas and nays on the amendment.
Madam President, I move to table the amendment. I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
No.
Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Beckidge, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Conrad, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Dement, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Inouye, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Carey, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Durbin, Harkin, Johnson of South Dakota, Levin, Murray, and Tester. Senators voting in the negative: Alexander, Coburn, Crapo, Graham, Kyle, McCain, Paul, and Sessions. Mr. Johans, aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mr. Kirk, no.
Hagan.
Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Corker, no. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye.
How are you?
Mr. Carey, aye.
Last time when you're having fun.
Mr. Isaacson, aye.
How are you doing?
Mr. Coates, aye. Mr. Coates, no. Mr. Beckidge, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Franken, aye. Mr. Brown in Massachusetts, aye. Mr. Bingaman, aye. Mr. Leahy, aye. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Mr. Vitter, no.
Thank you very much. Sure.
Mr. Toomey, no. Mr. Dement, no. Mr. Heller, aye. Mr. Cornyn, no. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Sanders, Aye. Mr. Grassley? Mr. Grassley? No. Mr. Grassley? Aye. Mr. Cochran? Mr. Cochran? No. Mr. Burr? Aye. Mr. Risch? No. Mr. Wicker? No. Mr. Nelson, Nebraska? Aye. Mrs. Shaheen? Aye. Mrs. McCaskill? Mrs. McCaskill? Aye. Mr. Webb? Aye. Mrs. Boxer? Mrs. Boxer? Aye. Mr. Bennett? Aye. Mr. Carper? Aye. Ms. Stabenow? Aye. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin? No. Ms. Rubio? Mr. Rubio? Aye. Ms. Snow? Aye. Ms. Ayotte? Aye. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island? Aye. Mr. Portman? No. Mr. Moran? Aye. Mr. Enzi? Mr. Enzi? No. Mr. Conrad? Aye. Mr. Lugar? No. Mr. Cardin? Aye. Mr. Lieberman? Mr. Lieberman? Aye. Mr. Merkley? Aye. Mr. Coons? Aye. Mr. Wyden? Aye. Ms. Klobuchar? Aye. Mr. Noe? Mr. Noe, aye. Ms. Collins? Ms. Collins? Aye. Mr. Inhofe? No. Mr. Lee? No. Mr. Pryor? Aye. Ms. Gillibrand? Aye. Ms. Murkowski? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Barrasso? No. Mr. Roberts? No. Mr. Casey? Mr. Casey? Aye. Mr. Warner? Mr. Warner? Aye. Mr. Akaka? Aye. Mr. Hatch? No. Ms. Landrieu? Aye. Mr. Menendez? Mr. Menendez? Aye. Mr. Manchin? Aye. Shelby? Mr. Shelby? No. Mr. Chambliss? No. Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown of Ohio? Aye. Mr. Hoven? Aye. Mrs. Hutcherson? No. Mr. Udall of Colorado, aye. Ms. Mikulski? Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mr. Lautenberg? Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Mr. Baucus? Mr. Baucus, aye. Mr. McConnell, no.